Today we're going to explore another reality. A reality where people have no stable income, often hesitates and struggles to find a place to live, and of course, has meager access to social security involving education and healthcare. Welcome to the life of the bottom 25% of the American wage labor quintile, and of course, the day laborers of China in Kunshan. I'm going to try to combine my personal experience with the book Nickel and Dimed, where the author worked in the bottom quintile wage labor force for a few months in 3 different cities: Minnesota, Key West, and Portland. We're going to see how these poor people struggle for opportunities, for jobs, and secure for a living under the meager wage levels, high rent, among many other difficulties. Let's delve into it. Now, Barbara talked about 3 distinct advantages she had over her coworkers. Number 1 is having a car. This is easily understandable because having a car means you have more options to access jobs and housing opportunities. And it also increases your transportation efficiency. While other of her coworkers may not have a car, this necessarily reduces their options and bargaining power. When they're facing jobs that are not really favorable, their housing and other factors may actually limit their choices and vice versa. The second advantage Barbara had was that she had no one she needed to be responsible of. Many females re-entering the workforce or already entering the workforce have children and family to take care of. They not only need to be responsible for themselves, they also need to be responsible for their children and their family. Under this constraint, this means that their job and their daily life is much more burdened than Barbara was. At least Barbara was on her own, and all of her wage had only to be used to take care of herself. This is much more advantageous given the circumstance that many of her co-workers were actually mothers who had a child at home. The last advantage is good health. Barbara had no chronic pains or whatsoever. Unlike, for example, one of the hotel cleaning person who had chronic back pain, Barbara had no real problems with her body. This is very advantageous when it comes to long-term hard labor, because if you are in good health, this means you can sustain much longer and you can do more on the job and therefore earn more wage. On the other hand, if you are chronically in pain, not only you are actually going to suffer from having less wage, you are also going to find yourselves in situations where you cannot afford any medical costs or checks to understand what the problem really is. When the problem accumulates and turns into real illnesses, you're not going to have enough funds to cure your disease, and this is going to deplete your already meager savings, dragging you further into the poverty cycle. So I think the health is the most important factor we're talking about here, which Barbara, thankfully, was in a very good shape. Now, since I have told you about day laborers in China, I think I need to cover who they are. They are usually coming from the inland regions of China where there are usually less work opportunities. Seeking economic opportunities in bigger cities such as Shanghai, Hangzhou, Beijing, and Shenzhen, they come over here in search of factory jobs or other forms of employment in hopes of advancing themselves and transcending the social barriers, i.e., they want to switch from the farmer class into a more profitable form of living. They want to go up in social status and they want for themselves a better future. However, the long working hours of factory jobs and the low paying wages, and of course the horrible conditions in the factories often shattered their dreams. And many of them found themselves after a few months of work and after even a few years still at where they are. They have not been provided with any forms of social advancement. So some of them, they choose to lay flat. In the Chinese word, this simply means to give up and stop trying. And they became the day laborers who live upon the wages given to them day by day. They will work for 12 hours with a certain employer and then they will quit. And then they'll play for 2 or 3 days before they go ahead and find another day laborer job. So it is this kind of pastoral, semi-unemployed status that these laborers soon came to be called. Like the lower wage quintile in the US, they're also being paid by a very meager amount. As of 2023 and even 2024, most of the time they're paid much less than 200 RMB per 8 to 12 hours of hard labor. On the other hand, they're different from their counterparts because they usually have no family or social attachments, they have even no family or social security, and they have less obligations and less long-term working opportunities and will to advance their social status. Because they have been discouraged so many times, they're bound to give up. Now, how am I going to connect this is going to be another matter. But now let's talk about the first important aspect and problem Barbara encountered during her journey. Housing. Why do I mention housing? Of course, the location of your house and the place where you live geographically confines the social resources you have access to. For instance, it limits your opportunity to work. It limits your health and education access. And of course, it determines where you're going to shop, whom you're going to associate with, and how, and all of these like life-related issues. This means that if you do not have a stable source of housing, you're constantly facing the situation that you have to move around a lot. And if you're searching for all of these cheap options, this necessarily means two things. For one, since you might be able to share a room with somebody else, you are not really secure. The second reason is, cheap housing may not really have all of those access to the best job opportunities, good education, good healthcare, and all of those social resources. Because they're usually far from these opportunities, or at least they have very poor conditions inside those rooms provided. This necessarily means you already have less social resource access than many other people. This creates a barrier which we call already inequality. Now, in this case, Barbara has already sunk into a similar trap even though she had a car with her. For example, when she is selling in Minneapolis, she faces the problem where there's no room to provide. It is a very hot season, and the infill rates are extremely high. She had finally need to settle on a motel called Clearview that has no privacy at all because the door is unlocked. The screen is battered on the window, so there's no fresh air at night, unless you want to bear with the bugs and the neighbors. And of course, no air conditioning and horrible cleaning conditions. All of this piles up to a $500 rent by the first time she gets her first paycheck from Walmart, which is only $42. How much is her rent bill, you ask me? Well, $500. Since Walmart withheld their first week of paycheck to prevent workers from running, I suppose, this necessarily means that Barbara simply cannot afford this housing even though the conditions are horrible and she had to drive 45 minutes to work. We have already probed into a very key reason why some of the workers lack social mobility. If you have to be planning around your housing opportunities like Barbara did, phoning every single motel available in the city and going to check out charity opportunities if you cannot afford your rent in this case, you are going to lack a lot of the times networking and finding and accessing those social resources, and of course improving your skills, which is the key to whether you're going to advance up the social ladder. This is very important, and all of these factors Barbara and her co-workers in a lower wage quintile simply cannot access. Let's look at another example at Key West, where at the Hearthside restaurant, Barbara's fellow workers are trying to find a place to live. Gail is sharing a room in the well-known downtown Flophouse for $250 a week. Her roommate, a male friend, has begun hitting on her, driving her nuts, but the rent would be impossible alone. Cloudy, the Haitian cook, is desperate to get out of the two-room apartment he shares with his girlfriend and two other unrelated people. As far as I can determine, the other Haitian men live in similarly crowded situations. Annette, a 20-year-old server who is 6 months pregnant and abandoned by her boyfriend, lives with her mother, a postal clerk. Marianne, who is a breakfast server, and her boyfriend are paying $170 a week for a one-person trailer. This is just one of the many numerous examples Barbara had to face. While she is cleaning, she also had to search for opportunities, for example, to share a room with others and all of those perplexing questions, and to check out which places are the cheapest in the county or which room is best available for her in the motel. All these questions piling up together means a very huge logistics cost. Barbara, for example, had to search for a lunch and other opportunities because the first housing bills often came before her first paycheck is due. All of those employment opportunities love to withhold their paycheck, it seems, so that the workers will stick to their positions and never dare to leave an inch. The cost is, of course, you have those bills piling up, and you have those meals to eat, you have your car to mend, your car to fill, and all of these added up together simply means there's no room for people like Barbara to wriggle around in this environment. Why are poor people being treated in such a demeanor where they have no good housing opportunities and they have no good wage to afford those housing even though they find them? One very simple answer provided by Barbara is that when the economy goes up, so is the upward pressure on renting prices. That means if the price level is increasing and consumption is increasing and everything is increasing, so will rent prices, because your house owner will feel obliged to raise the amount they will require you to pay so that they will not be hurt by inflation. Well, what about you? Obviously, you are the loser because your wage is not going up together with the rent. The bottom wage is not really fluctuating, and of course the employer wants to pay you as little as possible, and in keeping this price low, you are constantly trapped in this poverty cycle, and all of these things as you constantly look for all of those inflated housing prices, which you, one, cannot afford, and two, is not a good place to live. This is the first major factor that Barbara encounters in her journeys, and we already see this is dragging every single one of the workers down. Now, let's go back to China. Those daily shift workers, interestingly, does not face such a problem. They live in houses or rooms that pay 20 RMB a night. They pay for beds, they do not pay for rooms, because they earn only such a little and meager living. What they can pay for meals, for housing, and for water, all of those appliances are really low. As I have shown to you, this is the place where they live, and they have to share a room with somebody else. Interestingly, as you may have noticed, there is a very nice plug at the corner of the bed, and I tell you, actually, there is 5G internet access, which tells you about something about the living environment and the mental condition these people have. They no longer really care about their lives, and all they care is about today, what they're going to eat today, where they're going to play today, and they're going to spend every single penny because they no longer give a damn, since they see no upward mobility or opportunities. There's even though there might be no room for comparison between these two groups of people, we saw one very similar case. That while the Chinese day laborers have reacted to the situation that there is no upward social mobility, the US bottom low wage workers are still striving on the bottom line of living, and both groups have not really too much choice. Of course, you may argue for Chinese day laborers, they go ahead and work hard, but the reality is often harsher than the dreams, and many of them have ceased to make things a possibility. The next thing is wages. Now, certainly wages matter a lot. And just to keep a reminder, we're talking about the late 1990s. However, I do not really know what those wage numbers really mean, but I think I need to convey the reality to you, and you can make the judgment for yourself. Now, for one, When Barbara was working at the Key West restaurants at her side and at Jerry's, the most common consensus is that they give the wage that is way below the expected average. They're only giving about $2 or $3 an hour. And where do most of your rest of your earnings come from is from the customers' tips. Now that is probably not very surprising, but considering the fact that when the customers are not visiting the restaurant very often during like a more cooler season, this basically means that you're only getting somewhat like $5 per hour, which is barely around the minimum wage level. Furthermore, even though when the volume is as high as you can get, such as Barbara was visiting the Jerry's restaurant, it is only still about $7.5 an hour. Not fairly high considering that you still have $4 to $5 a gallon $4 to $5 of gasoline to pay each day. It was these little costs that mounted up along with the huge burden of rents that drags the lower wage quintile down. Furthermore, if we consider that Barbara is not having a very long commuting time between her several jobs, this is already a very fair deal. Even though that's the case, Barbara still struggles to cover all of her income despite cutting her expenses. She decided, like many of her co-workers, since she does not have like someone like a boyfriend or husband to like share their income, she will take another job at a hotel where she will be cleaning rooms and getting that extra money. This, however, did not last long, since one of the very high evening rushes at Jerry sends everybody into a frenzy, and when 10 British tourists come in to absorb the American experience by mouse, Barbara simply just gave up because every single customer is yelling out their demands at her, and she cannot bear this grueling, degrading working condition. She just walks out and nobody stops her. But her first challenge just failed. And from then on, we know that in this story, there will be no real winners or such a story where the poor can easily get by in a low-wage America. There simply is not a way which they made this possible. It is very difficult for them, even when they're struggling on the line of existence. I think somebody should have done something about this, should they? Well, I guess they should, because remember, the late 1990s is supposed to be a time of so-called economic prosperity, where jobs are more available, people are earning more wages, and everything's supposed to be going up. And now in 2024, and the global economic cycle is looking down, you can imagine that the bottom quintile is not living a good life, considering the rampant inflation and the probably not so shifting so much bottom wage that will actually mean a scene for most of these low-wage workers. Now, when she was scrubbing in Maine, i.e. working as a maid service to clean other people's homes, she had found out that the job market is still very reluctant in giving those poor people higher wages, even though there's a very short supply of labor. This should alarm economists. As she said, even though all of these companies are chronically short of bodies, they are still reluctant to raise the wage. They're still reluctant to raise it about $5 or $6, and they're still encouraging these laborers to take on as many jobs as they can. I wonder how, I wonder why. Because if you keep the labor price down and you keep suppressing everybody's wages, this is good for you as a boss because you can earn more, but it's certainly not good for the laborers because they're still struggling on that subsistence line. Short of laborers doesn't matter perhaps because you're still not chronically or desperately short of people who want to work for you. This probably just creates a situation where still people does not come for work and the wages are still very low on them because they lack that bargaining power, since unions and collective bargaining simply do not exist, as Barbara have attempted in both Maine and Minnesota. So the result is that you're still going to earn these low wages despite the fact that price levels are still going to rise. A very interesting situation, to be honest. Back in Minnesota, things are not really working out either. She had to drive 45 minutes to the Walmart to only earn $7 an hour, while an alternative job offer, while it says $10 an hour for an 11-hour shift, says that $10 must be wrong and is a wage level too high. It's only about $7.5 to $8.5 an hour. Not pretty enlightening either. So, coupling with the fact that we talked about that the rent prices was so high, with the fact that we are constantly having a low wage, this is basically the trap of how you create inequality. If you're spending the most of your income on like those scrap spending such as like gasoline and clothes and stuff like those, and you have to still even a greater chunk of your rent to pay, there's not really much savings you can gather. And that really means a lot of things in terms of social advancement. Because if you cannot learn new skills, if you cannot pile up savings to like moving to someplace better or someplace else, you don't really call that social stability, social mobility, because you're still virtually stuck on that same line where you have started 10 years ago. People in China are facing like very similar situations, especially the day laborers I have mentioned. They came to the large city from very poor villages and they seek job opportunities. However, distressed by the lower wage levels than what their employers have told them through every single possible layer of exploitation and deduction, because the very low price they receive in the factory for their labor and the never-ending speed of the assembly line had convinced them that a better life and an upper social ladder is simply just not possible. So day labor is an invention that basically caters to their need of kind of escaping from reality and just to live day by day and never consider for their own future. While they have very different mental conditions, these two groups of people we're talking about, with the day laborers losing their hope and the American bottom wage quintile workers still doing whatever they can to sustain an existence, you can never deny that due to various reasons they have lost their ladder of upward social mobility. As the higher elites condense all their wealth, this necessarily means that the poor have still less and less resources to utilize, and in an economy that is already very full and well-fledged, there's not really edge you can just sneak into, with most of these workers not really educated to create an opportunity for yourself and achieve the rags to riches story they so be called in the late 19th century. Not everybody is an Andrew Carnegie. And we should poll the people. Not everybody is Andrew Carnegie. And we should do something, at least, to help these people to make their dream a possibility. That's all. Thank you.